In the beginning of this week's parsha, Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Yidden, Ben Me'ah V'Esrim Shana Anochi Hayom, I'm 120 years old today. Lo Ucha Lo Yidlatis V'Lavi, I can no longer go out and come in, which Chazal explained that this does not refer to not being able to go out and come in physically, but rather it means you can no longer go out and come in b'divrei Torah, in the words of Torah, which teaches us shenistatmu memena, that it was blocked from him, closed from him, shari chochma, the gates of wisdom. The Ein Yaakov, in his version of the Gemara, the expression is, instead of shari chochma, it says ma'ayonos chochma, the well springs of chochma. The Medrash Tanchuma, which also brings the same idea, in the Medrash Tanchuma it says the expression mesoiros chochma, the traditions, the oral traditions of chochma. Now in Rashi we find something interesting. Rashi also brings the same idea, but Rashi brings seemingly a combination of these two other versions rather than the Gemara's version. Rashi says that what was blocked from Moshe was mesoiros u'ma'ayonos ha'chochma, the oral traditions and the well springs of chochma. And of course the Rebbe's question is, why isn't Rashi taking the common version of the Gemara, which is shari chochma, the gates of chochma, and instead combining seemingly two different expressions, which we don't find anywhere, this combination of these two expressions, mesoiros, the oral traditions, u'ma'ayonos, and the well springs of chochma. The Rebbe also asks, why doesn't Rashi just say it was blocked from him the divrei Torah, the words of Torah, as Rashi himself really starts off by saying that le'ucha lo'idlatzes v'lavoi means in divrei Torah, and then he explains it by saying that was blocked from him, it was mesoiros u'ma'ayonos ha'chochma, the oral traditions and well springs. Rashi could have just said was blocked from him was the divrei Torah. Says the Rebbe, Rashi is actually coming to preempt a very, very simple and obvious question, which Mefarshim don't deal with. How could you even say that Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, I can no longer go out and come in with divrei Torah, in words of Torah, when immediately following these words we have three whole parshias that Moshe Rabbeinu is saying and telling them many words of Torah. The parshias of Vayelech, Hazinu, and V'zois HaBracha. And the Rebbe says we cannot say that when it says divrei Torah, that I can no longer go out and come in with divrei Torah, it's referring to specifically matters of halacha. Number one, says the Rebbe, it's very difficult to say that although there's three parshias coming up, and this is being called that he can no longer go out and come in divrei Torah. We're speaking about words of Torah shebeksav. Furthermore, says the Rebbe, in these parshas we actually do have halachas. There are new mitzvahs being given, the mitzvah of hakel, the mitzvah of writing a sefer Torah. Furthermore, every aspect of Torah shebeksav came along with Torah sheba'al peh, the explanations, the interpretations of those words of Torah shebeksav. So in other words, Moshe Rabbeinu gave them plenty of words of Torah, both Torah shebeksav along with Torah sheba'al peh. So how could you possibly say that Moshe Rabbeinu could no longer go out and come in words of Torah? This is why Rashi doesn't use the words divrei Torah. He says that divrei Torah, but then he explains that this means mesoiros u'ma'ayonos ha'chochma. This is why he has to use these expressions, because these are two specific things which we could say are not included in what Moshe Rabbeinu needs to be learning and teaching the Yidden in these three parshias. What are these two things? Mesoiros, oral traditions, are things that Moshe Rabbeinu was given over at Har Sinai, but more specifically, these are referring to things that are not alluded to at all and not hinted to at all in Torah shebeksav. In other words, most halachas that were given from Moshe Rabbeinu orally have some sort of basis where we could link it and attach it to psukim in Torah shebeksav. However, mesoiros over here is referring to things that are not hinted to in Torah shebeksav at all. Ma'ayonos ha'chochma, what are the well springs of chochma? This is not, again, the halachas themselves of Torah sheba'al peh, which clearly Moshe Rabbeinu would have had to tell the Yidden any halachas that they need to know, but rather ma'ayonos, a wellspring, is the pilpulim, expounding on the ideas of Torah. And like the Mishnah says, Mayan HaMizgaber, like a wellspring that just keeps on flowing stronger and stronger. This is the bligvul aspect of Torah, that infinite aspect of Torah. And therefore, says the Rebbe, when Moshe Rabbeinu is teaching the Yidden and he needs to give them everything that they need to know, so yes, of course he's giving them the parshias of Vayelech, Hazinu, and V'zois HaBaracha with all of its interpretations. But this doesn't necessarily include, and he doesn't have to include, the other oral traditions that are not rooted in these words of Torah, And as well as, it doesn't have to be that he's going to give them all the pilpul of Torah. So he could still give them these things 100% and they're given completely. And nevertheless, he's saying there's a certain element and a certain aspect that he can no longer give over. However, says the Rebbe, this still raises another problem. Moshe Rabbeinu is coming to explain over here why he can no longer be teaching the Yidden Torah, because he doesn't have anymore, he cannot give over anymore these Mesoiros, these traditions, these oral traditions, and the pilpul of Torah. And the question becomes, regarding the oral traditions that need to be given over, if they are relevant to halacha, so we can understand that that could be a reason why Moshe Rabbeinu could no longer be the one leading and teaching the Yidden if he can no longer give over this aspect of Torah. But this part of pilpul of Torah, this part of the well springs of Torah, seemingly is not so relevant anyways for him to teach it to the Yidden. It's not necessary for him to teach it to the Yidden. And therefore, why is this being made as a point? That's why I can no longer be teaching the Yidden, leading the Yidden, and therefore it's the time for the new manik, for the new leader to come. Says the Rebbe, the explanation is, the actual fact that Moshe Rabbeinu realizes and he feels that part of Torah is being blocked from him now, in other words, that there's some element that he cannot give over anymore, this already is a sign to him that it's time to give over his Nasius, to give it over to Yeshua. The Rebbe explains this on a deeper level. We know that Moshe Rabbeinu is compared to the sun, Yeshua is compared to the moon. One of the differences between the sun and the moon is that the sun has a constant and a consistent light all the time, whereas the moon, of course, we know, is waxing and waning. It keeps on changing. And this is actually why Moshe Rabbeinu is compared to the light of the sun specifically, because Moshe is the midah of emes. Emes, truth, is something that never changes. And Moshe's light was never changing. So when Moshe Rabbeinu feels that a certain element of his chachma is being blocked now, even though it might not directly impact of the things that he must give over to the Yidden, to him this is a proof that now there's something lacking in the very essence of his oir, in the very essence of his light. And therefore he could no longer keep on giving over to the Yidden, because now it's already a time of change. And change is coming in himself. Clearly it's a time to move on to Yeshua, which represents the moon, which the moon in fact does have change. Says the Rebbe, all of this is a very, very practical hoiro in the avodah to every single Yid. And the Rebbe says, the Mishnah tells us, if a person forgets one thing of his learning, the Torah counts it as if he's liable with his life. And the question is, why such a harsh punishment? One thing out of all your learning? So one of the explanations, says the Rebbe, is that by a Yid, all of Torah, every aspect that he learns in Torah needs to be engraved and become part of his very, very essence. And therefore, the actual fact that suddenly he realizes, I'm missing something of Torah, I lost something, I'm forgetting something of Torah, this, in a certain sense, needs to break him to the extent similar to the idea as if his whole essence is being broken, and that's what it means he's liable with his life. Similarly with time. Every single moment of his life has to be connected with Torah, and therefore for Yid is chas v'shalom wasting a time from the time that he could have learned Torah. So we have a very harsh expression that hikares tikares. In other words, it's again something touching this very, very essence, because not only about the quantity of time, but the actual fact that there could be a moment that's not connected with Torah. And similarly, the Rebbe says with all matters of Yiddishkeit. By a Yid, every single aspect of Avodas Hashem needs to be engraved in his very, very essence, in his very entity, in his whole personality, so that the smallest thing in Avodas Hashem, even a small derabanan or a minig Yisrael, has to really, really matter to him down to the very, very essence, to the extent that if something is missing, you realize this is a major thing missing in his whole personality, in his whole life. Similar to Moshe Rabbeinu, that the moment he feels that there's something missing now that he doesn't have anymore, then clearly he feels that this is touching his very essence, not only about what he could give over to the Yidden. But this itself, says the Rebbe, when we have this awareness, this helps us to add in Avodas Hashem in a way that we feel that every single thing, a good thing that we do add, is adding to the very essence of his life, connecting him with Hashem, the source of all life, as the pasuk says, "V'atam adveikim b'Hashem Elokeichem, chayim kulchem hayom."